Once you've declared the data members for your class, the next step is to create a set of constructor methods. Constructor methods allow you to instantiate your object with data at the time that you declare the object. The way you write a constructor method is start with the keyword public, followed by the name of the class. Constructor methods always have the name of the class, followed by the parameters that you want. So for example, if I want to set a time object with hours, minutes, and seconds, then I'm going to have 3 parameters for hours, minutes, and seconds. Then in the body of the constructor, you assign the parameter to the data member. So notice I'm not doing any data validation on these data members. I'm going to save that for another lesson in this chapter. Right now I just want to demonstrate how to create constructors. So there's a full constructor method. Sometimes it's called a fully parameterized constructor because we have a parameter for each one of the data members. To use that constructor in the main program, we'll use the data type time, followed by the name of our object, followed by the assignment operator, the keyword new, which lets the compiler know that you're calling the constructor, followed by the name of the class, and then the arguments, just like so. So now I have a time object with hour 7, minute 15, and seconds 0. You can have multiple constructors in a class definition. So for example, if I wanted to only set the hours and minutes of a time object, I would create a constructor with 2 parameters, one for the hour, one for the minutes, and then I would just set the seconds to a default value such as 0. So I can call the constructor like this. And now I have 2 time objects, one set to 7:15, one set to 8. I can have a third constructor with just one of the parameters set. And here you'd have to decide if you wanted it to be hours or minutes. We'll say hours. Minutes equals 0 and seconds equals 0. One of the things you want to do with your class design is make your class as flexible as possible. So you want to have as many constructor methods as you think the user will need in working with your class. Remember, when you think about designing a class, think about not only how you would use it, but how other people would use it also. And then finally, we can write something called a default constructor. The default constructor takes no arguments and sets the parameters to a default value for the data type. So for hours, minutes, and seconds, that default value would be 0 since they're all integers, and 0 is the default value for integers. It turns out that if you don't create a default constructor but yet try to use it, the compiler will automatically assign those data members their default values. So you don't actually have to write a default constructor, but it's a good idea to do so that a user of your class can see what's implied by default construction. And when you make a call to the default constructor, it'll look like this. One last thing we need to talk about before we leave the subject of constructors is that the reason we can have multiple methods with the same name is due to a concept called overloading. Overloading means you can have methods with the same name as long as the signature is different. And by the signature, we're mostly talking about the parameter list. So for example, this first constructor has a parameter list of 3. The second constructor has a parameter list of 2. The third constructor has a parameter list of 1, and the last constructor, the default constructor, has a parameter list of 0. The compiler can keep this straight because when you make the call to the constructor, it sees 3 arguments, so it knows to go find the constructor with 3 parameters, like so. So overloading is an important concept in object-oriented programming, and it allows you to have extreme flexibility in being able to use method names over and over again as long as you modify the parameter list. That's about all there is to say now about constructors, so let's move on to the next lesson where we talk about how to retrieve data from our class using what are called property methods. After you've declared the data members and created the constructors for your class, the next step is to create a set of properties to allow the user access to the data members of the class, or at least those data members that you want to allow access to. A property looks like this. Start out with the keyword public, followed by the return type for the property. Think of it like a method, and then the name of the property. In this case, it's the hour because we want to be able to set and return the hour. Then you write a get method. The get method is used to return data from the class. So here we're going to return the hour. We want to get the hour that's in the object. After you've written the get part of the property, then you write the set part. The set part allows you to set a value for that particular member. And you do that by using the data member name, the assignment operator, and then the keyword value. The value will be whatever the user places on the right-hand side of that keyword. Later in this chapter, I'll show you how to use a helper method to validate that data coming in. That's how we create a property. So before I create the properties for the other two data members, let's test this property. So we'll come into our program and we'll create an object and we'll use the default constructor. And then if we want to set the hour, we'll write thetime.hour equals and then a value. So we'll say 22. If we want to display that hour, we can use the property as a value returning property, just like a method, to return the time. Let's take a look at that by running the program. So it returns 22. If you're coming from a programming language like Java, this might look a little weird, but this is how Microsoft has always worked with objects, using properties. You can still write what Java programmers called getter and setter methods, and I'm going to show you one example of a setter method in a minute for setting a complete time after an object's been created. But in the Microsoft world, properties are used extensively, and you should always have properties available in your objects because other Microsoft programmers will be expecting them. So now let's go back to the class and set properties for minute and second. Then we create the setter. And again, let me reiterate that I'm going to show you how to do some data validation in another lesson in this chapter. Now let's do second. Like I said, this is very, very mechanical. Let's go back up a line. So there are the properties for hour, minute, and second. And I'll leave it to you to test those to make sure that they work, but they work exactly like the hour property works. Now let's look at one more example. One thing we can't do with properties is set a complete time. So what we're going to do is we're going to write a method called setTime, which looks exactly like our fully parameterized constructor, but it will allow us to set a time. So setTime simply takes an hour, minute, and second as its parameters and sets the appropriate data member. So let's look at an example of using that method. We already have the time written here, so let's take that out. Then we can say thetime.setTime, and we'll say 13:35, 0. And then if we want to display that time, in the next lesson we're going to talk about displaying data. But we could display it now by simply calling the property. Put a colon in between them, plus thetime.minute, plus a colon, plus thetime.second, like so. Let's run the program. 13:35, 0, which is exactly what we set. SetTime is a setter method that allows us to set a complete time, which we could also do in separate statements using properties, but this is just a little bit more concise. And then we looked at how to create properties, which is simply creating a name for the property. In this case, we took the data member and capitalized the H, and that's something else that you should consider doing since that's a Microsoft standard to have property names start with a capital letter. And then we write a get portion, which returns a value, and a set portion, which sets a data member using the value keyword, and that value will be whatever is on the right-hand side of the assignment statement when the property is called. We did that for hour, minute, and second, as you can see here and here. So that wraps up this lesson on setting and retrieving data from a class object. Now let's move to the next lesson where we'll see how to display the data that's stored in a class object.